Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, visual effects artist Jeff Desom, joins us to talk about their work on Everything Everywhere All at Once. Please be warned that there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Jeff. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi there. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here as well to join us to talk about Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think you are my third guest on about the film. I had already had the stunt coordinator Tim Ulick and also costume designer Shirley Karata. But now it's time to look at the visual effects side of it all. Before I would jump in and we start talking about the film, I just want to sort of get an idea. What does a visual effects artist do?
A visual effects artist comes usually in at the tail end of production during post-production, and it can be a whole range of things that what they have to do. Some of that can just be cleaning up things that didn't quite work out the way they were supposed to in production, but that can also range all the way to creating an entire environment, including characters to play out, that to be animated and play out a scene. So it's a very, the spectrum of what visual effects entails is very, very broad, and there's no one right way to do it, or it's really every movie is has different requirements and sort of hires different visual effects artists. And it's also something that's still very new in terms of the various departments that you have in film. So, it's still in its infancy, I would say, of what visual effects artist does. And I think as we move forward in the coming decades, we'll see it. Certainly, it has already revolutionized the way we make films, but we'll see it even more, I think, being integrated into production all the way to pre-production and the way films are made, and it is really something that isn't just limited to post-production anymore, but it's also become like an integral part to the entire movie making process.
With visual effects, as you said, it's very new technology, but also it's ever evolving, and we're seeing more and more of this technology on screen. I think a good example is the Star Wars, what they've created with the LED screens and that technology, where they don't need to use green screen now, but they just have the camera and in the background is whatever they want, and the screens themselves detect the camera and sensor there and move around as the camera moves as well, which is insane to think that that's where they've gotten to at this point now. But even on a film like with Everything Everywhere All at Once, there was only a handful of people working in the VFX department compared to a normal film where it is just an endless list of people who are working on a big budget film like a Marvel or Star Wars or a DC. I think if I'm right, there were seven of you.
Yeah, 5 in the core team, and then at our peak we had 7 working on it,
which is like insane. I'll be curious to talk about what the workflow is a little bit later on. But how did the project come about for you?
I've known the Daniels and also like Zach Stolz, and who was the visual effects supervisor for quite a while now. I think maybe 10 years back or so, and we sort of grew up alongside making music videos, and and those were by nature very low budget productions, and required to be crafty about things. And visual effects was always one element where you yourself could sort of make something look a bit more, stand out a bit more, through the use of visual effects, and give you that extra edge. And I think that Daniels reached out to me way back to help them like on a music video that they were making, and so that's how I got to know them. And same with Zach. He's also director in his own right, and he's doing his own visual effects. And it's sort of like through that whole group that I also met the other artists on the movie, Ethan Feldbau and Ben Brewer. And we sort of, we've known each other for a long time. And when the movie came about, I think I joined the team a little bit later. When I came on board, they had already Ethan and Ben, who'd been a bit more involved on the conceptual side of things. And they'd been doing a few VFX, but I came in sort of around the time they were about to lock the edit as sort of like the final 6-month stretch where we were essentially finalizing the movie.
So when you come into a period of the last stretch of it, working in those 6 months, and you're finalizing each scene and what else has needed to be included in or added to it, what does your day-to-day job look like, and what is your workflow?
The way Zach, our supervisor, had organized the whole workflow, it was because this happened in the middle of lockdown. So essentially there was the plan initially, I think, was that we would all sit together in an office, share an office across from where they were editing the movie. We could instantly ask questions and like look over each other's shoulders and sort of collaborate in a much more direct way. And then obviously pandemic happened, and we were all sort of scattered around in our own little home offices. And it became his what he did so well on this movie was to very quickly come up with a pipeline and a workflow that would allow for all of us to work this way. And he sort of set up a system where each of us had a drive, everything essentially on it. Every shot that needed the visual effects was on that drive, and he'd already set up the projects. The way it works is like we all work in the same software called After Effects, and it was really just a matter of like grabbing your shot off the hard drive, and it was already set up in the project, and you could just immediately start being creative and like working on the shots, as opposed to having to think about the whole folder structure and all that stuff, which can, that in itself can slow you down a lot. And so we had like, it felt like overall like a very, it's very fluid and very, it really helped us creatively, because the way we did a lot of shots, there wasn't really like one set way to do it. It was a lot of it was like, oh hey, we got this shot, we don't know exactly how to do this. We kind of know like, okay, we wanted to look like this or that, and it felt like from a creative standpoint, it felt like, unlike other shows or movies where it's like, all right, this is like a very rigid system or structure and you have to do things a certain way. This felt like very like, okay, you do your thing and hand us the shot back, and and we'll take it from there. And lucky for me, like they seem to be happy with what I was doing, and that's on a day-to-day basis, it was always like I had a handful of shots that I would work on within a given week, and the deadline, there wasn't one right away. It still felt fairly loose at the beginning because of they didn't have a release date. Because of the pandemic, they didn't want to release the movie immediately. So we always knew that like a deadline was coming, but not quite when. So it felt very, in a sense, it was very unique. And I don't think this situation will ever, exist again, where you can sort of dabble in a movie like that and sort of like really find the movie as you're working on it in post, because usually the turnaround is so fast that you cannot afford the luxury of trying out things. But for this, we could try out a lot of things, and it was very it was very creatively very fulfilling, at least.
I think something like that is always great to hear, being able to be as creative as possible, but also having the constraints of a pandemic, where I think maybe like the plus side of having something like the pandemic has helped with the creativity and allowing you guys to flourish and get on with what you're doing. Because I think sometimes as well, like with pre-pandemic life, everything felt very 1,000 miles per hour, 1,000 miles per hour. Got to get this done, got to get this done. Go, 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 go. Whilst I guess if you're having time to breathe, it's given you a time to actually adjust, to understand what you need to do, what and how you're going to execute what's going on. But as well with something like this, where there's not many of you, probably a lot more work to do, but then it gives you an idea of the finer detail of each shot and each scene that you're working on. I do have a list of scenes that I've seen whilst YouTubing, where as a normal viewer, you would kind of forget that actually, hang on a second, something like that is added in post-production. So I think a good one is the chef scene in the Rakakuni universe, where you see the chef cutting various bits of food onto the hot plates. And even when you're creating something like that, how difficult is that to create and then implement it into the scene?
Yeah, that particular shot was a funny one. Like it was, when I got the shot, it was the first shot I got for the entire movie. It was my first shot. I didn't know how to do it, like, or what approach would be the best solution for it. There's so many ways you could do it. There's essentially, in the scene, you have to imagine like the plate, and the plate is like the raw footage that we got was essentially just Harry Chum Jr. pantomiming as if there were vegetables flying in the air, but there were none. And so you look at that and you have to think, okay, so they want vegetables flying around, and it's got to look choreographed and coherent, and like, how do I create these vegetables? And I think the first place my mind goes, or any visual effects artist will think, okay, we're gonna have to model these vegetables in 3D. I'm gonna have to texture them, light them, animate them, render them, composite them, and it's like so many steps, that would be involved. And I think we were counting on like, oh, this is going to take like 2 weeks for this one shot, or not quite. But I thought, hang on, I'll just try to paint these vegetables in 2D. So because I have a knack for painting, and like, I like to draw stuff photorealistically. I thought, okay, it's just an apple, or like whatever. It's like a shrimp, a cucumber. I can draw that. And so I drew it essentially in After Effects, which has like a very simple paintbrush, and I put like a highlight on it and a bit of shading, and I animated that. And I with the motion blur, it sort of started to look okay. Like I couldn't tell if this was like a 3D vegetable or whatnot, and so I decided to do the entire scene like that, and it didn't take me very long, and I showed it to the guys, and yeah, it was like, that this is great. Like, you can we have no idea how you did this, but this works. And yeah, there was one more, I think, Rakakuni shot that got the same treatment, but I myself was surprised that it worked, because I was sure I was going to have to do everything in 3D and try to place these vegetables in space. And at the end of the day, it was very much like, like it was like essentially Roger Rabbit, where you just go and cell shade stuff on top of existing footage. And sure, it looks a little cartoonish, but I think for the nature of what the scene was about, it was quite fitting.
you comparing it to Roger Rabbit, which is one of my favorite films, the way that they did that film, and then if you're comparing that to how your process is, quite funny how, even though you said earlier, technology is evolving, still going with the sort of old school techniques, but now just on a computer rather than drawing them out. But the funny thing as well is, as a normal audience member, you wouldn't realize that stuff like that. You'd think that they're sort of in camera tricks, but at the same time, it's those small details that really do make the film, especially seamless. I know that I was listening to one interview with the Daniels where they were talking about how even though they had 500 VFX shots in the film, they still wanted to make it as natural looking as possible, and to use it more of the film to be more of editing than green screen running around. But there's also two other scenes that I've got on my list which do have the use of green screen, but also I think the plates for the shots were done by one of the Daniels, and that's when Evelyn gets sucked through the universe. So the way that they shot it was that they had the plates where, I can't remember which Daniels it was, but he was walking through on holiday through the cities.
Yeah.
Daniel Kwan, thank you. Walking through the cities and then using that as a plate and then having the green screen whilst Michelle Yao gets sucked through. For something like that, because you have a green screen, you can create whatever you'd like as the background. But how much more difficult is it that they're getting pulled through universes what you're capturing and what's going to appear on screen to make it look so seamless, and for it to have have the plates shot and the green screen shot be stitched together?
In addition to just shooting it on green screen, they also had, like, similar to what you were saying earlier with that Star Wars technique where they like have those LED panels. They had sort of like a cheap man's version of that where they put two LED panels left and right of Michelle Yeoh, and that panel already played back the footage or the plate that was going to replace the green screen. And so Daniel Kwan, he himself is like, he's a great After Effects artist, and that's like, he knew like how to construct a shot from the ground up. So he started a year before even shooting that, filming all these plates, then cutting them together, speeding them up in order to be able to play those back live on set. Then, he was also the one to set the shot up. He was the first artist on it to like sort of lay everything out. And I took over from him to just essentially mostly just clean up and make sure that like the key was there wasn't too much green screen spill and all that, and just making sure it's overall a bit more just clean. And so a lot of that had to, like, it was only possible because they are in essentially also VFX artists, and they know how to shoot something as economically as possible in order to get the result that they have in mind. And that's a huge advantage, in this day and age. And I think it's, when you look at not just that shot, but like other shots that I would get, and you look at the plate, there's like so much already in the plate that makes the shot that way. You look at it and the material is there, the raw material to make this work. Like, they shoot it and you can tell someone's shooting that who knows what's needed on post end of things.
If you have the directors themselves who do know what is needed at the end, it must make your job a lot easier, knowing that there's people who've set it up correctly, have an exact idea, and having that experience of knowing not just the tech, but also being able to communicate what they'd like as the end product as well. But as you said as well, having that experience is extremely valuable, because it must make the work process so much easier to actually understand what the directors want as well.
Yeah, and the other thing you have to keep in mind, like, as far as I know, they didn't use storyboards, and usually like storyboards are, something that is as visual effects heavy as this. It's highly recommended to work storyboards, but since they kind of know, and they can skip that step and just shortlist it and decide on the fly. If they change something, they already know, like, okay, this is something that's possible, or we're shooting ourselves in the foot here. They're they're just very fluid in the language of digital effects.
I think it's pretty insane for a film like this not to be storyboarded and have things done on the fly, even just the VFX, because I've seen what a VFX previs looks like and how much people go in just to plan a shot of someone walking down the rain, compared to something like this where, it just kind of blows my mind a bit with like not being able to storyboard it and just thinking, we're going to freestyle this. Obviously you have an idea of what you'd want, but things change on the day, or if there's other mitigating factors that might change what you decide to do. But still, wow, to not be able to storyboard and have that all ideas in your head, just go with it, is incredible. There's another scene as well where I saw where somebody was being sucked in by the bagel, and the video that I saw, it had the best way to describe it for me is that it had layers where you see the person being sucked in, but there were different layers of their face in terms of what their facial expression was like. I'm not sure where to begin with this, because how do you like it? Because for me, it's kind of like, it feels like a mind trick, that it feels like that it doesn't. I know it's not real, but it looks so real, if that makes sense. That I don't know how somebody is able to create something like that. So is it possible if you could just walk through how something like that is made?
Yeah, that particular shot was the first one I did in a sequence of shots where people were sort of affected by the bagel, and they like, it was also sort of the research and development laboratory for what those effects were going to look like subsequently in that sequence. And this shot, it was actually Dan Kwan himself who was playing that extra who's being pulled into the bagel. It was just like him against green screen acting out. And we had, like, when I came in, like, they had like certain, Zach Stoltz had set up like a rough visual of what the effects that we could apply to it to give it that stretchy, being sucked into another dimension thing. But then, like, that shot took me, I think, a week to work on. It was a big shot, even though it was a very short shot. It was sort of where I tried out a lot of things. Some didn't work, and some worked, and I could sort of like fill my tool belt with different things that I would then apply in later scenes where people are where the skin is sort of affected by the gravitational pull of the bagel. And it was really like, I had no idea how to do any of that when I started on the shot. And then over the course of that week, and I didn't finish the shot within a week, but we kept on reiterating it. And, I found out all these displacement methods to displace and sort of make it feel like, there's like turbulences in the air, and like different methods of refraction, and then the chromatic aberration, and all these little, all these small things that you pepper in to make it look realistic. Because that was always another big part, was that what they were saying is like it had to feel sort of, I want to say like hype, like it didn't have to feel photorealistic, but it had to feel like optical, at least. Like it had to feel like it was shot, like you shot an effect on camera. Like they kept saying more Ghostbusters, less Marvel. Like they wanted it to really feel like there was an in-camera effect or something happening. And a lot of that was just finding the right look for that. And Ethan Feldbau, one of the lead visual effects artists on this, he'd come up with like, a little plugin that sort of mimicked the chromatic aberration of the actual lenses and the camera that Larkin Seipel used to shoot the movie. And it's all like these little things that they'd already developed to make it look, to integrate everything seamlessly into the rest of the movie. Because this particular one was essentially all green screen, but it had to feel like, yeah, this like that's the background. Here's paper flying through the air, and now the face is being pulled off. And that was actually a happy accident. That's like you were talking about those layers earlier, and there was a moment where I didn't switch off the layer. The idea was just the face gets pulled off, and there was one where I left the layer on, and you saw the pristine original face below it. And I was like, oh, that could be fun. I'll show that to them, and they thought that it tied nicely into the multiverse idea where you have like sort of a few versions of a person coexisting at once close to the bagel. And yeah, we decided to keep that and lean into that.
No, I think when you hear the sort of process behind it all and the idea that you want to do it more Ghostbusters than Marvel is quite fun. But also on top of that, when you're saying that you weren't sure how to do it once you started it, but with sort of trial and error and happy accidents, you got that final look, which looks really cool. But then also, as I said, even though they said not to make it look photorealistic, it still does in a weird way, but like in a really cool way in terms of just that it's not like lazy CGI. It's just, I don't know, for me, it just looks really cool. It reminds me a little bit of something like The Thing, when you see where the two heads sort of come out, and they're I know that's done practically, but it reminds me a lot like that.
Oh, that's great. It's a great compliment.
Also, with the VFX and working on something like this, what would you say was probably the hardest task that you had to do whilst working on the film?
There were a couple of really, really tricky things. There's one totally invisible effect now that nobody ever knows is there, but there's a scene. It is when Jobu Tubaki is being introduced. She comes out of the elevator, and she gets rid of all the policemen, and then it's only her and Evelyn in the corridor. And the scene was shot actually with Jamie Lee Curtis standing behind her during this entire sequence. And I think they were trying to cut it, and it just like didn't really work for whatever reason. And the task then fell upon me to get rid of Jamie Lee Curtis because she was knocked out on the ground, I think, in the narrative, and she wasn't supposed to be standing behind Jobu Tubaki. So my job was to get rid to essentially erase her standing, over the shoulder. And it was a moving shot, so it had to like be 3D tracked, and she was wearing this furry coat, which is notoriously hard to get rid of, even if you have a green screen, and there was no green screen. So it was, I think I spent 2 or 3 weeks on that sequence alone, just painting out Jamie Lee Curtis frame by frame. And yeah, no, it's something nobody will ever know happened. If you watch the scene, even I watched the scene now, I forgot that I spent all that time in that corridor trying to get rid of one of the characters. But there were also other scenes. I think like the one of the trickiest, for me at least, was one that was center stage, like during a big emotional beat at the end, just before Joy steps into the bagel, just before she gets like, okay, she takes a step back and she gets like absorbed by the bagel. And it's this big emotional beat. And so I knew that, the effect, I had to not distract you at all. Like that was the challenge. Was like, it was like the background was all blue screen there, and whatever I was going to do couldn't stand out. Like it just couldn't take away from the moment, because it would have taken you out of the movie. And so I think that was also the shot with the most iterations. I think there were like 36 versions of that, and we were working on it right up to the deadline to get it right. And I remember sitting in a QC, like a quality control screening, and the shot came up and it just wasn't there yet. And it was like, and it really, it sits there at this moment, and like it takes you out. And I had to go back and work on it for some more until it was good, like passable, like it just wouldn't distract you. And that was, I think, the most, like that shot of her getting fully absorbed by the bagel was for me, technically the most challenging one, and creatively.
You do have so when you do have what's interesting to hear about that is you going through the screenings and working away on it, but with so many shots that go into it as well, are the shots, I just want to check as well, are the shots already edited together for you to start working on, or do you work on each shot then gets put back onto the timeline to be edited on?
So the way a shot comes to the visual effects artists, or like on most projects, it's like editorial will output just those frames or that chunk that needs work, plus minus a few handles on each end of the shot, just in case they want to make some minor tweaks, they can still do it. But usually a shot, when I get it, is already like, it's very defined, like that it will live in the edit. It will live in the locked cut, because otherwise, you'd be you can't really, like, it takes so much time and work to work on each frame that, like, you have to be very precise with what you send to visual effects.
Okay, yeah, because I was curious to see what, if with your work, if you're constantly working on a scene, if it would become to you already fully cut and for you guys to work your magic. But
they do, yeah, and to some extent, like some of them had already, like, which I love. Some of them had like the temp sound in it and the temp music, and that really helps. Like because I'm also like, a weird thing happens when I animate, especially when I animate stuff that's not there. I need sounds. I need something to, like, and the sound really helps me to sort of like visualize it in a funny way. Yeah, it really helped to get the shots. Like when we got the shots, they always had that soundtrack in it already, and you play it on loop so many times that you really internalize the sound and the noises and the music. Even the music was already, like, to some extent in those clips that we got, and it really helps. It really, like, it helps you, like, also know where you're at in the story, and, like, sort of, in terms of, like, the linearity of it all, because sometimes there's some continuity that you also have to watch out for when you're doing VFX. And it's not always the case that you get the sound along with the audio, with the video.
I guess that could lead on to my next question, is that if you have a sound effect of what the scene is going to look like, does that affect your work, or will it affect the sound designer's work? So if there's a way that, just as an example, you have on screen something that the sound effect is more comical, is that going to change the way that you're going to work? And maybe changed it from a more serious tone to more light-hearted tone?
Yeah, I mean, there was, like, one example comes to mind where there's, like, one shot where Evelyn and Jobu sit down on the couch, and they sit on the crack of the couch, and then they get, like, sucked into the couch. And that shot had, like, a very funny, I don't know, it had, like, a really funny sound to it. And I don't know, somehow the idea came up to add, like, a flip-flop that would, like, one of Evelyn's flip-flops would come loose and, like, fly in the air and be, like, the only thing left on the couch once both of them disappeared. And it was like there was like a just a yeah, there was like a funny sound in there that made me like sort of like time the flip-flop to that sound. I remember. I don't know if it ended up in the movie, the sound, because what we got wasn't like the final sound. The sound department, they again went over everything once the VFX were in there, so that they also had then something that they could react to and that they could sort of manufacture their sound, like design their sounds too. So it's like it's definitely like a bit of a ping pong game here, but it doesn't always happen like that. Like usually there's no sound on a shot. You just get the shot, it's mute, you do your thing, and you hand it back, and then the sound designers come in.
Okay, because it was always, because I do wonder if it's ever who has to blink first to change what they're working on and how they're working on it. Just the way that if you have, if one thing looks one way, or it will sound the other way, or how it will dictate people's work, really. Just to come to my penultimate question, what was your favorite shot to work on?
My favorite shot. I would say I really enjoyed the Rakakuni shot, because it was very satisfying to get to the solution so quickly. I got lucky, that sort of the 2D version of it worked out, but it was also just very satisfying to animate it frame by frame, and sort of like you lay it out and then you play it back, and to see that whatever you just did sort of sticks to the plate, like it looks as if it was there and it's interacting with what's there. It's very satisfying, and that was just like, and seeing just all the joy it brought to everyone else. I would say, yeah, that was my favorite shot to work on.
I'll make sure that when I watch the film again, to keep an eye out for that one, and in the back of my mind I'd be like, this is Jeff's favorite shot. But even this is just such a unique film, in terms of, if somebody had to say what was your favorite scene, it's very difficult to pick from, because each universe is so specific. It has its own set of rules, its own sort of, it feels like basically a little short within a big film of these characters. And even when you explain to someone who hasn't seen the film what Rakakuni is, and people think you're just a bit crazy and think it's actually Ratatouille. But no, it's just I'll have to watch that back again just to see your work with where the sushi and all the vegetables are going all over the place without actually being real. They're just computer generated. But just to lead on to my final question, what's next for you? Because I know you dabble in directing as well. Is there anything else that you'll be working on that we should keep an eye out for?
Currently, we are working, like all the guys who worked on Everything Everywhere, like the whole visual effects department, Zach, Ethan, and Ben, where we got together after the movie, and we were looking at further collaborating. So as sort of a VFX collective, and we have currently a few projects that we can't really talk about, but we're not allowed to talk about it. But it's definitely something that we weren't planning on doing, but during this movie we found like that we collaborated really well, and especially sort of our strengths and weaknesses sort of they sort of complemented each other, and we were still friends after the project was finished. So it's like a good sign to keep going. In terms of directing, I might have one or the other smaller projects coming up, music video, and in terms of I'd love to direct a feature script of mine, but it's a long game. It's making movies takes time.
Yeah, but I will fingers crossed that we get to see that feature in the next few years. And I'd like to keep an eye out for your work as director, but also what you guys do next. I'm sure it will be announced at some point, or we will see a trailer for something coming along. But yeah, I am going to keep an eye out to see if that feature comes along, because I'll be curious to see what you do and what the future brings. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me to talk about Everything Everywhere All at Once, which you can now get on via streaming or on DVD or on Blu-ray. I'm not sure about Blu-ray. I think they'll probably do a special edition of some sort for that. And I think they're doing a re-release as well with some additional footage over the next few weeks or so, from my understanding. But yeah, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
No, I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time. You take care and bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.